Welcome to The Psychology of Us. This podcast is created by RJ Starr, a public intellectual and independent psychology educator. The material presented is educational and interpretive, examining psychological life as a domain of understanding rather than intervention. It does not provide therapy, diagnosis, or professional guidance. Each episode stands as a complete work of public psychological inquiry.
So, welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are jumping straight into a completely fascinating, rigorous essay today.
It really is a brilliant piece of work.
It is. It was prepared for The Psychology of Us by RJ Starr. And for you listening, we've custom-tailored this deep dive just for you. We are going to focus intensely on what the author categorizes as the mind domain of psychological architecture.
Which is such a crucial piece of the puzzle.
It really is. And right out of the gate, I really need to establish the boundaries for this conversation because the text makes this incredibly clear, and it is vital for how we approach this entire analysis.
Right. We have to set the parameters here.
We do. We are exploring a concept called the closed circuit of public reality.
Which is essentially the fusion of legacy news media and national politics.
Yes. And we have to state up front that this framework is strictly nonpartisan.
Absolutely nonpartisan.
I mean it. We are not going to be naming specific networks. We aren't naming political figures. And we are certainly not here to complain about one ideological side or the other or lament some supposed decline in journalistic purity.
Right, because that entirely misses the point of the essay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are looking exclusively at structural psychology. Like, how does the human mind adapt to the environment it is placed in?
Yeah, and if you strip away the partisan labels and just look purely at the mechanics.
The gears of the machine, basically.
Yeah, right. How information is generated, how it is circulated, and, how it's consumed. You start to see structural patterns.
Yeah.
The essay approaches this not as a political crisis, but really as a problem of psychological organization. It's an exploration of the architecture of perception.
The architecture of perception. I love that phrasing. Which I guess brings us to the hook of this entire essay. And honestly, the premise that completely stopped me in my tracks when I was reading it.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say.
Right. Because we hear all the time that the public is just, checking out.
Right. People are exhausted by the news.
They're apathetic. They're withdrawing from civic reality. That's the narrative. But the text proposed something entirely different.
If it flips it on its head.
It does. It asks, what if the public is withdrawing, not from civic reality itself, but from the mediated performance of it?
It's a brilliant pivot. I mean, it completely changes the conventional wisdom.
Yeah, because the standard narrative assumes a kind of moral failing on the part of the public.
Right, like we've all just become ignorant or lazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this essay argues that the detachment is actually a structural psychological response. It's a response to an environment that has become fundamentally performative.
We're withdrawing because the system is no longer providing reality. It's providing a very specific type of theater.
Theater, yes. And to understand why the mind is pulling back from that theater, we first need to map out the architecture of the stage.
Right, what the essay calls the closed circuit.
Yeah, and I want to push on this a bit because closed circuit sounds a bit academic.
It can sound a bit dry, yeah.
Right, so what are we actually talking about when we say a closed circuit of public reality?
Well, let's break down the anatomy of it. At its core, the closed circuit is a self-sustaining loop.
Okay.
It's an ecosystem where signals circulate internally. They just constantly return to the very institutions that produce them in the first place.
So in this case, it's that fusion between national political actors and legacy media institutions.
Exactly. They don't simply interact with one another as separate entities anymore.
Right.
They generate, interpret, validate, and intensify one another in a continuous, endless loop.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to walk through the actual chronological flow here, like how a piece of information travels through this loop.
Sure.
It usually starts with what the text calls an event, right?
Well, yes, but let's be careful with the word event here.
OSO.
Because in the context of the closed circuit, an event rarely means a substantive change in governance.
Like a major law being implemented or something.
Exactly. An event here is often just a piece of raw material, like a statement, an accusation, a symbolic gesture.
Or like a highly manufactured strategic conflict.
Yes, exactly. Something designed specifically to be observed.
Okay, so a political actor produces this symbolic gesture. They put the raw material out there. Then the legacy media takes that material
and they instantly convert it into a narrative. This is where the translation happens.
Oh, I see.
The raw material is taken into the media machinery and packaged. It becomes a crisis or a moment of unprecedented momentum or a moral emergency.
Right. The media applies the narrative frame to it.
But the loop doesn't end there. That's the kicker.
Right, because the political actors don't just sit back and watch the news and say, oh, good job.
No, they respond to the narrative the media just created about their own original gesture.
Which is wild.
That is the defining feature of the closed circuit. Politics responds to the framing, not the underlying reality.
Oh.
And then the reaction to the media's framing becomes the new raw material for the next cycle of coverage.
So then political consultants are brought on air to interpret the response to the framing.
Exactly. And national campaigns instantly start fundraising off the interpretation of the response to the framing.
It's like a hall of mirrors.
It is. Commentators attach deep emotional meaning to the entire sequence.
And what about the public?
Well, the public is merely invoked as an audience to watch this internal validation process just, spin faster and faster.
Okay, I was trying to visualize this while I was reading it, and I kept coming back to professional wrestling.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison. Have you watched a lot of pro wrestling?
Honestly, a bit when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But think about what's actually happening in the ring, right?
Okay, paint the picture.
You have these performers executing incredibly dramatic, high-flying maneuvers. The entire match is choreographed for maximum emotional impact.
Sure, it's very theatrical.
But the crucial detail is who they are actually communicating with physically.
Right.
Because a wrestler is constantly pointing at the audience, yelling to the crowd, asking for cheers or boos. They speak about the audience constantly.
Yes.
But their actual physical movements, like the mechanics of the match, the timing of a suplex, that's dictated entirely by the other wrestler in the ring.
Oh, that is a remarkably precise analogy.
Right. They are locked in a closed physical circuit with their opponent. They invoke the crowd, but they are only truly reacting to each other.
What's fascinating here is that in the closed circuit of public reality, the institutions use that exact same rhetorical trick.
They really do.
Politicians and media figures constantly invoke the public. They say things like, the taxpayers demand answers, or the voters are outraged.
Or working families are watching this closely.
Yes, they name the public as the moral center of the performance.
But they aren't actually talking to us.
No, the communicative circuit runs entirely inward.
Wow.
The politicians are talking to the journalists are talking to the political professionals.
It's just back and forth.
Right. The institutions speak about the public far more often than they speak to the public in ways that actually clarify lived experience.
And what's wild to me is that the essay goes out of its way to stress that there is no conspiracy here.
That's a huge point.
I think it's very easy for people to look at this pro wrestling dynamic and assume there's like a smoke-filled room somewhere.
Oh, where media executives and political strategists meet every morning to script out the day's drama.
Yeah, like they're all in on it together.
Yeah.
But the author rejects the conspiracy theory model completely.
Absolutely. And frankly, a structural explanation is much more terrifying than a conspiracy.
Why do you say that?
Because a conspiracy implies control. It implies someone is at the wheel.
Right.
The essay argues that this distortion is purely emergent. It arises naturally from the structural incentives of the institutions involved.
Okay, so what do you mean by structural incentives? Break down what each side of this wrestling match actually needs to survive.
Well, consider the modern business model of legacy media. What is the fundamental engine of commercial viability in a totally saturated digital space?
I mean, it's conflict, isn't it?
It is conflict. Conflict is what maintains audience contact. It preserves institutional relevance.
And it ensures that the metric dashboards keep ticking upward.
Exactly. Without conflict, the commercial model falters. They need it.
And on the other side of the ring, what does modern nationalized politics require?
Attention. I mean, in an era where local politics has been heavily eroded and national identity has kind of taken over everything,
right,
a political actor needs constant high-definition attention. They need it to mobilize their base, to raise those small-dollar donations, to generate internal status.
To basically maintain their authority.
Yes. So you have one institution that desperately needs conflict to survive commercially.
And another institution that desperately needs attention to survive politically?
Exactly. And when you lock those two institutions in a room together over decades,
interacting hundreds of times a day across digital platforms,
this closed circuit is the inevitable result. They feed each other perfectly.
The politician provides a highly stylized conflict, and the media provides them massive, concentrated attention.
And over time, they stop responding to objective reality and start responding only to the mediated presentation of reality produced by the other side.
Okay, so if we accept that this machine is spinning and it's constantly accelerating to meet those structural demands for conflict and attention, we have to look at what this machine is actually producing.
Right.
Because an endlessly accelerating machine can't produce infinite deep meaning.
It cannot. The output of the specific structural arrangement is, by definition, noise.
And this brings us to a major section of the text, the loss of proportion.
Yes.
Because the essay draws a very sharp distinction between information and noise, but it doesn't define noise the way an audio engineer would.
No, or the way we use it in everyday conversation either.
Right, so how does the text define it?
This is a critical foundation for understanding the mind domain and psychological architecture. Normally, we think of noise as, like, static on a radio.
Or simply a lack of information, an empty signal.
Exactly. But the text defines noise in a highly specific way. It says noise is information without usable proportion.
Information without usable proportion. I really want to linger on that phrase because it feels so essential to all of this.
It is.
Can you give me an example of what that actually looks like? Like, how can something be factually accurate and technically informative, but still function psychologically as noise?
Well, think about proportion as the scale of relevance to your actual physical lived experience.
Okay.
Imagine two different signals arriving to your mind domain. Signal A is a letter from your local municipality informing you that your property taxes are increasing.
The worst.
Right, but it says you will owe an additional $500 next month.
Okay, so that is highly usable information with massive proportion. It physically impacts my bank account. I have to reorganize my budget around it.
Exactly, it's real. Now imagine Signal B. It is a highly polished, heavily edited, viral video clip of a national politician yelling at a witness during a congressional committee hearing.
Oh, we see those every single day.
Right. And ask yourself, does that clip change any laws?
No.
Does it implement policy?
No.
Does it alter anything about your physical environment?
Not a single thing.
But it is broadcast for 72 hours straight across every legacy media platform, complete with breaking news banners, dramatic musical cues, and panels of experts debating its historic significance.
I see. So Signal B is factually true, like the politician really did yell.
Yes.
It is technically information. But the psychological packaging of it is completely disproportionate to its actual utility in my life.
Precisely. That is the essence of noise in the closed circuit. The emotional intensity of the signal vastly exceeds its practical relevance to the person receiving it.
Wow.
And when the media political loop applies the exact same mechanisms of delivery to a minor symbolic dispute as it does to a global crisis,
Like using the breaking news banner, the urgent font, the morally charged headline for literally everything.
yes, when they do that, the mind loses the ability to scale its reaction.
Because if everything is framed as a world historical breaking news emergency, then logically nothing is.
Right.
The alarm bell is just ringing all the time.
And what happens when an alarm bell rings continuously? A signal that once interrupted the mind to warn of actual danger gradually becomes mere atmosphere.
It just blends into the background.
The circuit continues to emit urgency, but that urgency no longer arrives in the mind as important.
That is such a crucial distinction, urgency versus importance.
Right. The content might technically inform you about a shifting poll number or, a controversial tweet,
Yeah.
but the psychological experience of receiving that information is repetitive, inflated, and completely detached from ordinary life.
Now, I can imagine someone listening to this and saying, wait a minute, are you arguing that politics doesn't matter? Like, should we just ignore what's happening in the Capitol?
Oh, absolutely not. And the essay is very careful to head off that critique.
Right, it's a vital distinction.
The essay is absolutely not suggesting that public affairs or governance are irrelevant. Actual politics matters immensely.
Of course, laws, public budgets, the courts, these things shape actual human lives in profound ways.
Undeniably. So the text draws a thick line between the slow, consequential movement of actual institutional governance and the hyper-fast symbolic commentary spiral that surrounds it.
A performed layer of politics.
Exactly. The irrelevance lies in the interpretive excess. It is the daily, relentless conversion of minor bureaucratic maneuvering into a high-stakes psychological demand on the audience.
It's the demand that you feel intense, personal, moral outrage about a procedural vote that will probably be forgotten by Tuesday.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's put ourselves in the shoes of the audience here. The individual human mind. If my mind is suddenly forced to live in this environment, An environment saturated with signals that demand extremely high emotional participation, but offer almost zero usable meaning for my daily life. What happens?
Right.
Because the mind can't sustain that level of chronic alarm. Does it just break?
Well, no. The human mind is remarkably resilient. It doesn't simply break, it adapts.
Okay.
And this adaptation is what the author identifies as the pivotal concept of the entire analysis. It is the central psychological mechanism we use to survive the closed circuit.
This is the hinge of the whole essay. Here's where it gets really interesting, folks. The text calls it psychologically absent attention.
Yes.
I just love this phrase, psychologically absent attention. But how does that actually manifest? If I am paying attention, how can my attention be absent?
It's a paradox, right? But it's the condition where an individual maintains behavioral contact with a news product, but remains inwardly unavailable to it.
Behavioral contact without inward availability.
Exactly. The outward behavior suggests engagement, but the internal cognition is withheld.
Like having the news playing in the background while you cook dinner, but you aren't actually processing a single word they are saying.
Yes. Or checking a news homepage out of sheer morning ritual while you drink your coffee, just scrolling past headlines without absorbing them.
Or opening a daily political newsletter because it arrived in your inbox, scanning the bolded text, and closing it without an ounce of your worldview shifting.
Right. And here's the catch. The closed circuit, the media platforms, and the political campaigns, they record all of those behaviors as definitive contact.
Right. They log a view, a click, an open, an impression.
But the mind experiences those actions as little more than habit. Repetition provides a sense of orientation.
We like knowing where things are, even if the content itself is completely devoid of insight.
Exactly. We engage with the structure of the news, not the substance of it.
Think about highway hypnosis. Have you ever experienced that on a long drive?
Oh, absolutely. The phenomenon where you arrive at your destination with no memory of the journey.
Yes, exactly. You're driving a route you take every single day, maybe your commute to the office. Your eyes are wide open. Your hands are gripping the steering wheel. You are technically operating 2 tons of heavy machinery at 60 miles an hour.
It's kind of terrifying when you think about it.
It really is. You stop at the red lights, you use your turn signals, you stay in your lane, you are behaving flawlessly. But your conscious thinking mind is completely elsewhere.
You're thinking about an argument you had yesterday or, what you're going to make for dinner.
Right, and you pull into your driveway and you literally cannot remember the last 10 miles of the drive.
That is a phenomenal analogy for this condition. Let's really analyze that.
Okay.
In highway hypnosis, the external system, the traffic cameras, the sensors on the road, the other drivers, they register your presence perfectly.
Yes, you are measurable. You are a car on the highway.
But inwardly, you are completely absent from the cognitive task of driving. You have relegated the task to a subconscious, habituated routine.
Right.
In the closed circuit of public reality, the exact same transfer happens. The audience remains physically present enough to be counted by the digital metrics.
You are a click on the dashboard. You are a screen tuned to a channel.
But inwardly, you have become absent enough to resist being changed by the information. The story is opened, but it is not absorbed. The panel discussion is heard, but it is not considered.
And what I found so powerful about the essay's framing here is that it removes the judgment from this behavior.
It does.
It's so easy to dismiss the public as just like apathetic or lazy or suffering from a shortened attention span.
That is the most common and perhaps the most arrogant misdiagnosis of our era.
I agree completely.
The essay stresses that this reduced inward availability is not a moral failing. It is a highly sophisticated protective adjustment.
It's the nervous system throwing up a shield.
Exactly. It is a structural defense against overexposure. Think about the cognitive load required to genuinely process complex, nuanced, geopolitical, or domestic policy information.
It takes massive mental energy.
It does. Now imagine a system that repeatedly demands you expend that emotional and cognitive energy on events that are ultimately inflated, remote, and practically unusable.
You would exhaust yourself in a week.
And you would burn out completely. So the mind learns. It learns to withhold itself.
Right.
It is a silent rebellion of the nervous system. The mind learns how to scan the environment without surrendering to it.
It learns to listen to the urgent tone of the broadcaster without actually believing that an emergency is occurring.
Yes. It reacts maybe with a fleeting moment of annoyance or validation without integrating the new information into its core model of reality.
Okay, but this creates a massive glaring contradiction.
How so?
Well, if you are right and the public's mind is inwardly absent and just going through the motions of highway hypnosis, then how do you explain the data? Because these media companies and political campaigns are constantly bragging about their metrics. They point to record-breaking engagement, billions of impressions, massive click-through rates.
Right.
How can the mind be absent if the data says we're more engaged than ever?
That brings us to the most critical misinterpretation happening within the closed circuit today. It's the illusion of reach.
The illusion of reach.
Yes. The circuit is entirely misreading its own instruments.
What do you mean by misreading the instruments?
The institutions treat exposure like clicks, views, ratings, shares as authoritative evidence of relevance simply because those things are easy to count.
Right. It's a hard number on a spreadsheet.
Exactly. They assume that measurable contact equals meaningful reach. But as we just established with your highway hypnosis analogy, contact is absolutely not the same thing as engagement.
Well, wait, let me push back on this a little.
Please do.
Because if I sit down and click on an article about a new piece of legislation, the traditional assumption is that I am clicking because I lack information and I want to acquire it.
Right, that you were expressing curiosity.
Exactly. I want to learn a new fact. But if my attention is psychologically absent, what on earth is that click actually expressing? Why did my finger press the mouse?
To understand the motivation behind that click, we have to move out of the mind domain for a moment and look at another pillar of psychological architecture,
Okay.
the identity domain.
The identity domain. Let's explore that.
We tend to think of identity very casually, just as, a list of beliefs we happen to hold or demographics we belong to.
Right. Like I am this, I am that.
But psychologically, identity is a stabilizing structure. Evolutionarily, identity is what organized our continuity across time and kept us safely within a tribe.
It protects the self from the terror of disorientation.
Precisely. And the text argues that in the modern closed circuit, the vast majority of digital metrics are measuring identity confirmation, not information comprehension.
Oh, wow. So a click isn't an inquiry. It isn't a search for truth.
More often than not, it is a search for stability. A click might simply express anxiety. It might express habit.
Right.
Or, most powerfully, a share on a social platform might not signal that you have read, understood, and vetted the complex geopolitical nuances of the article.
It might simply signal, I belong to this specific group, and I reject that other group.
Exactly. The content of the article almost doesn't matter. It's just a flag you're waving.
That makes so much sense. It's pattern participation.
Yes. You are interacting with the media product the way someone interacts with a religious ritual. Not to learn a new fact about the universe, but to confirm your place within it.
Wow.
And this raises an important question about the measurements that these institutions point to. They point to them as proof of their immense public interest, but they are increasingly just a record of patterned participation within highly polarized identity environments.
Think about the last time you saw someone share a deeply complex investigative report on social media, accompanied by an all-caps outraged caption.
Right, we see all the time.
Did they actually read past the fourth paragraph? Did they evaluate the methodology of the sources?
Almost certainly not.
Or did the headline just perfectly summarize exactly who they already believe the bad guys are and they shared it to confirm that reality for their peers?
The latter, overwhelmingly. And this raises a fundamental distinction that the essay makes regarding the quality of our information environment.
Okay.
We have to differentiate between high-quality journalism and the identity-driven media that fuels the closed circuit.
Break that difference down for me. Because, both sides claim to be doing journalism.
The difference lies entirely in what the product asks of the mind domain. Genuine, high-quality journalism makes demands on the mind.
It's cognitively expensive.
Very. It asks you to slow down your processing. It asks you to tolerate ambiguity because reality is rarely clean.
Right.
It requires you to separate raw evidence from the interpretation of that evidence.
It might even ask you to change your mind.
Yes. It might require you to revise a conclusion you arrived at prematurely, which is deeply uncomfortable. Quality journalism requires the mind to work.
Okay, and what about identity-driven media?
Identity-driven media, which dominates the closed circuit, does the exact opposite. It reduces cognitive effort to zero.
How does it do that?
By providing immediate recognition. It instantly identifies for the audience exactly who is foolish, who is corrupt, who is dangerous, and who is virtuous.
It supplies complete emotional alignment before reflective judgment even has the time to develop.
Precisely. It doesn't just tell you what happened out there in the world. It tells you who you are in relation to what happened.
That's a profound way to frame it. It converts public information into a ritual of belonging.
It does. And in an environment structured like that, the most successful, most viral, most heavily rewarded content is absolutely not the most careful, truthful, or clarifying content.
Of course not. The most successful content is the material that most efficiently performs identity and threat detection.
Right. Because if your primary subconscious goal is to stabilize your identity, then encountering information that proves you are right and the other side is dangerously wrong feels incredibly good.
It's deeply comforting. It requires zero cognitive effort to agree with what you already believe.
And this is why the quality problem in our media isn't just about a few bad actors or sloppy reporters. The problem is structural.
When public information is constantly routed through the machinery of identity maintenance, the mind stops encountering news as a field of inquiry.
It stops looking for answers. It encounters the news purely as a field of self-confirmation and threat detection.
Right.
The primary question the mind asks beneath the headline is no longer, does this accurately clarify reality? The subconscious question becomes, does this preserve my location within my social and symbolic order?
And the tragedy here is that the institutions, the legacy platforms, the political organizations, they absorb all of this identity-driven clicking, this tribal sharing, this rage scrolling.
Yeah.
And they absorb it as definitive proof of their journalistic relevance. They look at the dashboard and say, look how deeply engaged the public is with our vital reporting.
That is the governing error of the closed circuit. They confuse circulation with significance. They confuse a reflex with a thought.
Okay, so what does this all mean? If the closed circuit is prioritizing content that most efficiently performs identity and threat detection, and the public is engaging with it through this lens of psychologically absent attention, what is the ultimate consequence?
Right. How does this actively alter the way the human mind processes reality?
Exactly.
This brings us to the most structurally damaging phase of the process, what the essay calls the narrowing of interpretation. We have to look at how the mind domain is fundamentally altered by this environment.
Let's get into the mechanics of that, because you said earlier that the mind domain requires proportion to function properly.
It requires proportion and it requires interpretive space. To make sense of a complex event, the mind needs time to evaluate the significance of the incoming signals before a rigid significance is aggressively imposed upon it from the outside.
But the closed circuit doesn't allow for time. It compresses that space completely.
It compresses it down to milliseconds. Meaning is assigned instantly. The closed circuit narrates events before the factual evidence even has a chance to settle.
And it doesn't just provide facts. It provides the emotional instruction manual for how you're supposed to feel about those facts.
Through the tone of the broadcast, the sequence of the banners at the bottom of the screen, the repetition of specific buzzwords.
Yes. Uncertainty, which is a natural, healthy state when an event is unfolding, is repackaged as suspense to keep you watching.
Exactly. Complexity, which requires time to untangle, is repackaged as binary conflict because conflict is easier to process.
So the mind is never invited to think with the event. It is heavily pressured to simply receive the event already fully interpreted, chewed up, and digested by the institution.
And under these conditions of repeated urgency and severely compressed interpretive space, the mind's capacity to interpret the world physically narrows.
It just shrinks.
The mind grows heavily, dangerously dependent on familiar schemas.
Because familiar schemas reduce the massive cognitive effort required to process all this noise. If you have a bucket ready to catch the information, you don't have to think about what the information is. You just drop it in the bucket.
A very apt metaphor. The mind doesn't shut down. Cognition doesn't disappear. That is a common misunderstanding.
Right. People still think.
But cognition becomes subordinated to schema preservation. The mind learns to recognize the category of an event much faster than it actually evaluates the reality of the event.
It sorts things into buckets before it even looks at what it's sorting.
Yeah.
And the essay introduces a very specific formal term for this psychological process.
Yes. Parochial attribution.
Parochial attribution. Let's spend some time here, because this feels like the mechanism that explains so much of how we talk to each other right now.
Yeah, it really does.
Break down parochial attribution for us.
Parochial attribution is the psychological tendency to interpret unfamiliar, complex, or limited information through highly constrained default schemas.
Okay.
Crucially, it involves organizing any difference or ambiguity as a deficiency or a threat.
Oh, wow.
In the context of the media political circuit, it means that public actors, unfolding events, and diverse groups of people are instantly and repeatedly filtered through a very small set of pre-existing political narratives.
So let's say an event happens in the real world. A complicated piece of domestic policy fails to pass. Instead of evaluating the failure on its own procedural merits, like looking at the budget math, the legal hurdles, the logistical realities, parochial attribution means the mind immediately filters it through a different lens.
Yes.
The mind asks, how does this fit into the narrative I already believe about the inherent corruption or incompetence of the opposing group?
Precisely. And it happens automatically, almost beneath conscious thought. Under parochial attribution, public figures are stripped of their humanity and become mere symbols before they are allowed to remain complex persons.
Institutions cease to be functional bureaucracies and become moral objects of good or evil.
Exactly. Complex, developing, highly ambiguous situations become immediate, weaponized evidence for already existing narratives.
The essay points out something fascinating here. We talk endlessly about polarization in society. We obsess over it.
You really do.
But the author suggests that polarization is just the visible symptom. It's just the surface-level division. The deeper invisible structure driving it is this interpretive compression.
Polarization is just the output. The input is that the individual mind literally has fewer available routes by which information can become meaningful. The pathways have been paved over.
Which naturally leads to the distinction the essay makes within psychological architecture between two states of being, coherence versus rigidity.
This is the vital diagnostic tool. Coherence is a state of flexible, healthy alignment across all the psychological domains: mind, emotion, identity, and meaning.
Okay.
A coherent psychological system remains organized and stable, but it remains porous. It is open to new information. It can adjust its internal models when reality contradicts its expectations.
It has structural integrity, but it isn't brittle. What about rigidity?
Rigidity, on the other hand, maintains a mere illusion of stability. It achieves this by actively suppressing, excluding, or defensively reinterpreting any piece of information that would require the system to reorganize itself.
Rigidity is a defense mechanism against the pain of changing your mind.
Exactly. And when we look at the closed circuit, the fusion of national politics and legacy media, it becomes painfully obvious which state of being they reward.
The circuit immensely rewards rigidity.
Without a doubt. It rewards audiences for knowing in advance exactly what a story means before reading it.
It rewards commentators for taking genuine ambiguity and converting it into absolute desk-pounding certainty on a panel show.
It rewards political actors for constantly supplying easily recognizable enemies rather than complex solutions.
Because rigidity is highly efficient. The more predictable the interpretive path, the faster the outrage can be generated, the more efficiently the content circulates, and the higher the metrics climb.
Which leads to the most profound and unsettling consequence identified in the text. The closed circuit is not just a neutral pipe distributing information to the public.
Right.
It is an active pedagogical machine. It is actively distributing and enforcing patterns of psychological organization.
It's teaching us how to build our minds.
Exactly. It is teaching the mind domain to constantly expect alarm. It is teaching the emotion domain to remain continuously primed and prepared for conflict.
It's teaching the identity domain to locate itself purely through opposition, like knowing who you are by knowing who you hate.
And it is teaching the meaning domain to gather exclusively around the concept of threat.
It frames public life as an ongoing, unresolvable crisis. It produces a chronic baseline sense of historical emergency.
Right.
And when that exact frequency is broadcast and repeated daily for years on end, it stops feeling like a broadcast. It just becomes the invisible background architecture of how we experience reality itself.
It deforms attention itself. Think about the cumulative effect of years spent inside this architecture.
It's staggering.
The mind becomes expertly trained to receive public life merely as a sequence of urgent fragments. It learns to scan the horizon rather than to dwell on a problem.
It learns to categorize people and events instantly, rather than attempting to understand them.
It learns to react defensively, rather than to integrate new information thoughtfully. We end up in a society where we are incredibly, exhaustingly familiar with a vast number of signals, but we are deeply intimate with very little actual meaning.
We have all the data, but none of the plot.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the core realization of this entire structural claim that RJ Starr is making.
Yes.
The closed circuit of public reality hasn't just given us a headache, it has structurally deformed attention. The author makes this brilliant, inescapable point. Public reality is not a movie playing on a screen outside of us.
Right. It is not external to our psychological life.
The environment through which a society understands itself eventually becomes the very architecture of the individual mind.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, they are inextricably linked. The macro becomes the micro.
Exactly.
When the public interpretive environment loses its sense of proportion, individual thought loses proportion right alongside it.
When public meaning is constantly, relentlessly organized through a lens of repetitive urgency and manufactured conflict, the individual mind literally becomes less able to distinguish what is genuinely consequential to human flourishing from what is merely activated for the sake of the daily performance.
Yeah.
Because we've seen how the machine works now. The engagement metrics are a mirage. They are registering habituated identity behavior, not genuine civic engagement.
Right.
The daily political performances are generating massive amounts of noise, while the public is inwardly absent, surviving through highway hypnosis.
Captured attention, which is all the platforms care about, is absolutely not the same thing as clarified thought. If we pull back and look at the whole map we've drawn today, this is why the essay isolates the mind domain as the proper location for this analysis. This isn't just a media critique.
No, not at all.
The final question here is about the organization of human consciousness under immense, unprecedented cultural pressure. The essay's thesis is stark, and it demands to be taken seriously. A society cannot think clearly when its primary institutions of public interpretation lose the capacity to distinguish importance from stimulation.
Because the closed circuit isn't just a neutral thermometer reporting on a crisis of public meaning.
Yeah.
It is actively manufacturing the mental conditions that make meaning impossible to perceive in the first place.
It is a profound structural dilemma. We have allowed the construction of an interpretive machine that relies exclusively on stimulation to survive financially and politically.
And in doing so, it has embedded genuine quality so deeply within an ocean of noise, making it incredibly difficult for the average exhausted mind to separate institutional self-maintenance from genuine, vital public significance. Which leaves me with a final provocative thought, something I want you, the listener, to mull over long after this deep dive ends. We aren't going to tell you to delete your apps or tune out the news, because that doesn't solve the structural reality of the architecture we live in.
Right.
But I want you to consider the long-term trajectory of this adaptation. If our individual minds are continually adapting to this relentless noise by developing psychologically absent attention, if we are all just learning to scan without surrendering and withholding our inward availability as a necessary defense mechanism against the disproportionate alarm, what happens to the collective memory of a society?
That is the question.
Think about the archives we are building right now. When the historical record of this era is assembled entirely from the architecture of daily manufactured emergency and the relentless, rigid confirmation of our partisan identities, future generations are going to look back at our digital footprint, and they will inherit a perfectly preserved, high-definition, metric-driven record of our stimulations. But they might find a completely blank slate regarding what actually mattered.
This has been The Psychology of Us. The work presented here is part of a public psychological archive by RJ Starr. It is educational and interpretive, not clinical or advisory. Episodes are published as finished reflections and are intended to be encountered as complete works.